Ambassador, over to you. It's 8 a.m. We are live on YouTube. We are also recording the session and participants are connecting.
Thank you very much, Naira. Well, here we are in the opening of this event. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining this high-level side event preceding the commencement today of the United Nations Biodiversity Summit. I'm Peter Thompson, the United Nations Secretary General's Special Envoy for the Ocean. And my office, together with the UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs, has organized this event. Our topic today is biodiversity, the ocean's role. And we're concerned to ensure that on this special day of global consideration of biodiversity, that the ocean's contribution is seen to be front and central. So it should be. 90% of life on this planet hosted in the ocean. Our program is essentially as follows. We will have 3 videos from 3 high-level figures who have special places in the international effort to protect biodiversity and the ocean's health. After viewing these 3 videos, we will then engage with a panel of 5 eminent advocates for the ocean's well-being. And they will then join with us in a question and answer session. The event will come to a close in about 90 minutes time after we've heard a special message from the co-chair of the Friends of Ocean Action, Deputy Prime Minister Lovin of Sweden. So our opening video message has been graciously provided by His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales. For many decades now, the Prince of Wales has been a globally respected voice on the subject of biodiversity and climate change and the ocean. Interests he works on behalf of through countless speeches and articles and the more than 400 organizations of which he is president or patron. I invite you now to listen to the special message prepared for us today by His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales.
Ladies and gentlemen, I am most flattered and grateful to have been invited to share some reflections at this high-level side event focused on the role of oceans in relation to biodiversity. As the world struggles to deal with the coronavirus pandemic, we can see just how vulnerable we are to the borderless shocks caused by planetary emergencies. With time rapidly running out to restore the delicate balance with the natural world, and how many times have I tried to get this point across over the past 40 years, and with millions of people and species threatened by our destructive impact on the Earth, it is absolutely critical that we urgently mobilize the world for concerted action. This is why last week I called for a form of Marshall Plan for nature, people and planet. There is simply no time left to prevaricate. We have been busily and, I'm afraid, rather arrogantly testing our world to destruction. And now, finally, we have the disastrous evidence to prove it. The ocean's centrality as the largest reservoir of biodiversity and life demands that it receives meaningful consideration. This is doubly so because dwindling biodiversity, the decline of the ocean's health, and the climate crisis have the one common enemy, namely our burgeoning and anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions. This month, the World Meteorological Organization released the United in Science 2020 report, which states that human-induced climate change is affecting life-sustaining systems from the top of the mountains to the depths of the oceans, leading to accelerating sea level rise with cascading effects for ecosystems and human security. It reports that globally the ocean has warmed unabated since 1970 and has taken up more than 90% of the excess heat in the climate system. The good news is that solutions are increasingly available. What we need urgently are the foresight, courage, drive and determination to put them in place. So, if I may, ladies and gentlemen, I would just like to highlight a few specific areas that have the potential to make a real difference. First of all, having convened a roundtable earlier this year with many of those involved with carbon capture, reuse and storage technologies, it is clear to me that if we are to have any chance of winning this battle against dangerously accelerating global warming, we must buy precious time in the transition to a net zero circular bioeconomy by capturing carbon emissions at source. We have allowed the sand to run through the hourglass and need to buy time for vital carbon mitigation and adaptation strategies to reverse the damage we've caused. Secondly, SDG 14.6 calls for us to end harmful fisheries subsidies by 2020. After an incredible 2 decades of negotiations on the subject, the dedicated cadre of ambassadors currently negotiating at the World Trade Organization finally seem to have an opportunity at the WTO General Council meeting in December to bring success to SDG 14.6. A third immediate opportunity for success lies in SDG 14.5, the 2020 target of conserving at least 10% of the planet's marine and coastal areas. A number of opportunities exist, notably the proposed marine protected areas of Antarctica, for declarations to be made that will see us cross the 10% line before year's end. Thereafter, the challenge ahead will be to take the planet's proportion of conserved marine and coastal areas to 30% by 2030. In my humble opinion, we should be much bolder and more ambitious with this target, as such marine protected areas have been shown over and over again to have a hugely beneficial effect on marine ecosystems, enhanced fish stocks, and improved returns from fisheries. Fourthly, since protection of marine biodiversity requires protection of habitat, positive action is urgently needed for national laws to be enacted and enforced to combat habitat destructive practices such as harmful fishing methods, dredging of seagrass meadows, and deforestation of mangroves. Similarly, with the IPCC's clear warning on the existential threat to coral reefs and their critical place in marine biodiversity ecosystems, equally urgent action is required to place the great majority of the planet's coral reefs under protection. One need only consider that coral reefs are home to some 30% of the ocean's biodiversity to realize the seriousness of this situation. This is where a timely implementation of the 30% by 2030 pledge could make such a tangible difference. Credible carbon offsetting and circular bioeconomy approaches offer additional opportunities to catalyze investment and partnerships to support these protection efforts. Fifthly, coastal marine biodiversity is being negatively impacted by source-to-sea pollution from agriculture, industry and urbanization. Increased investment and innovation is desperately needed globally in sewerage and wastewater infrastructure. The sixth point is that overfishing continues to erode the ocean's biodiversity, with a recent FAO report indicating that 34.2% is overfished globally. We need to find innovative ways of tackling this problem while supporting regional fisheries management organizations where overfishing is occurring. Seventh, it is estimated that less than 10% of the ocean's biodiversity is scientifically described. The United Nations Decade of Ocean Science, 2021 to 2030, offers an opportunity to focus on studying and describing the remaining 90%. After all, we cannot fully protect or value our natural resources when we don't know what or where they are. To make progress in these efforts, we will need the full engagement of corporations, governments, and the academic scientific community. We should also seek to engage the passion, ingenuity, and innovation of the next generation of young scientists, marine biologists, and environmentalists, challenging them to come up with new solutions and ways to value our oceans. 8. The role of innovation in securing the required reductions in greenhouse gas emissions is pivotal to ocean health, and we are already seeing positive signs of this in everything from offshore renewable energy to the greening of shipping. Innovation will allow us to move from linear exploitation of finite planetary resources into a sustainable era of circular economies, sustainable food systems, and resilient cities. And, ladies and gentlemen, it will provide us with the new tools we need to safeguard the biodiversity of nature upon which all our lives ultimately depend. Finally, to move more rapidly, paradigm shifts are necessary in the fields of ocean investment and finance, and it is encouraging to see some of these already underway. I am very pleased, for instance, to see, at last, the growing support from financial institutions for the sustainable blue economy finance principles, something my International Sustainability Unit led some years ago. These principles are solutions-driven and embody the science-led, precautionary, inclusive, and impactful approach needed for a truly sustainable blue economy. Ladies and gentlemen, for us to make the right decisions at this critical time, science provides our firmest foundation. Our oceans are home to untold biodiversity and are part of the vital ecosystems and tapestry of life on this planet. To address the planetary emergencies we are now facing, and as I have tried to stress on so many previous occasions, we need to see the Earth as a patient in need of urgent critical care, recognizing that all her unique ecosystems are interconnected. Surely, ladies and gentlemen, we all share the responsibility to do whatever we can, and as soon as we can, to establish the required transformations to our patterns of consumption, production, and habitat destruction to restore balance and harmony with the natural world. Only in this way can we avoid consequences for all life on Earth, which are too awful to contemplate.
You are muted. Ambassador Thompson, can you hear us? We can't hear you.
Sorry, I was muted. Promise not to do that again. Look, our next special message is from His Excellency Danny Farr, who is the President of Seychelles. In recent years, Seychelles has been at the international forefront of ocean action through such measures as establishing giant ecologically rich marine protected areas and issuing the world's first blue bonds. In recognition of his leadership, in 2018, the African Union appointed President Farr as the champion of the blue economy in Africa. And I invite you now to listen to President Farr's message to us.
What more proof do we need than the COVID-19 pandemic to illustrate that we are living in critical times? This pandemic has shown us a number of things. Firstly, it has shown us how interconnected our societies are to one another. It has also shown us how our economies, our wealth, and our health are all intertwined and depend on nature. It is clear that our solutions will only come by improving the way in which we use and interact with nature. We are running out of excuses to not take action and running out of time. We cannot afford inaction. Almost 30 years ago, the Convention of Biological Diversity was set up to help stop the loss of biodiversity. Whilst there has been progress, there is a lot to be done. Recent reports like those of the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services and the Global Biodiversity Outlook 5 show us the rapid extent at which humans have and are impacting on nature. Biodiversity is declining globally at rates unprecedented in human history. The rate of species extinction is accelerating with grave impacts on people and their livelihoods around the world. Around 1 million animal and plant species are now threatened with extinction, many within a few years. The economic downfall of those losses will be tremendous. It is clear that humans will not win without nature. Against this backdrop, Seychelles is hopeful that the world can still achieve the Biodiversity 2050 vision of living in harmony with nature, but only if there is real transformative change in the way we value and use nature. The interlinking between biodiversity and the SDG goals are obvious. We need a new system that simultaneously addresses species loss, biodiversity protection, and ecosystem restoration, whilst at the same allows for sustainable development and support people's livelihoods. The post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework being developed by CBD should be the vehicle for this urgent change. My country, Seychelles, like other small island developing states, has always had this urgency in mind because protecting our biodiversity is existential for us. We have already started taking bold steps to ensure that our environment, our people, our biodiversity, our climate resilience, and our economy are all addressed together in a single strategy. Mindful of our limited resources, we are focusing our efforts in developing our blue economy as our catalyst for establishing and supporting management of new protected areas, protecting our carbon stocks, and adapting and mitigating against climate change. Similarly, through our marine spatial planning process, we are ensuring that economic activities sustain our population, but not at the detriment of nature. Resource mobilization is being facilitated by our Debt for Nature Swap and our Blue Bonds initiatives. We have always believed in protecting to ensure a sustainable future. We are testimony that nature provides greatly if taken care of. Therefore, I call on the world as we continue to work on the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework to stay committed, to take tough decisions as we steer ahead with our mission, to take urgent action across society, to put biodiversity on a path to recovery for the benefit of planet and people. The time for action is now. I thank you.
So our third special video message today is from Liu Xiaomin, who is the Undersecretary General for Economic and Social Affairs at the United Nations, in which role he guides the UN Secretariat's support for the follow-up processes of the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. You may also know that Liu Zhenmin has been designated as the Secretary General of the UN Ocean Conference to be held in Lisbon next year. I now invite you to hear Mr. Liu's message to us.
Distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, I'm pleased to address this important event on biodiversity, the ocean's role. Biodiversity underpins all aspects of life on our planet. Nearly half of the world's population, especially the most vulnerable, is directly dependent on natural resources for its livelihood. Biodiversity provides not only the nutritious food we eat, the fresh water we drink, and the clean air we breathe. It also provides the basic goods and ecosystem services, including potential medicines on land and in the deep sea that are crucial to human life and sustainable development. The COVID-19 pandemic has further shown how human health is intimately connected with our relationship to nature. The emergence of 75% of the infectious diseases is driven in part by degradation of ecosystems and is exacerbated by climate change. Ladies and gentlemen, our world is facing a biodiversity crisis, which will put humanity at risk if we don't act now. The recent report by the Intergovernmental Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services estimates that the global rate of species extinction is currently tens to hundreds of times higher than it has averaged over the past 10 million years. Unsustainable use of land and marine resources, pollution, and adverse impacts of climate change have put an increasingly large number of species in danger. And the multidimensional impacts of biodiversity loss and degradation are even more severe. Biodiversity links and interacts with almost all the sustainable development goals. Failure to address biodiversity loss will greatly undermine our efforts in combating climate change and addressing ocean conservation, water and food security. It will jeopardize our achievement of the SDGs related to health, jobs, energy, forests, sustainable communities, and global partnerships. Yet, we have an opportunity to do things right. We can turn the pandemic response and recovery towards a more sustainable, resilient, and inclusive path. Ladies and gentlemen, 2020 marks the 75th anniversary of the United Nations. It is foreseen as a super year for nature, pivoting on the biodiversity, ocean, climate change nexus. Despite the postponement of the UN conferences, we should not lose sight of what we envisioned: to chart a course for slowing climate change, protecting ocean and biodiversity over the next decade. Ocean supports a multitude of life forms, from the blue whale, the largest animal on the planet, to tiny microorganisms. However, due to the impacts of human activities such as pollution and overfishing, the health of our ocean is deteriorating fast. Marine and terrestrial biodiversity are at risk. Coral reefs, home to 30% of the ocean's biodiversity, are at risk of mass die-off if the global temperatures continue to increase. As a crucial agent for Earth system resilience, the ocean plays a key role in preserving biodiversity and protecting the natural environment. Conservation and sustainable use of oceans, seas, and marine resources will not only protect and restore marine biodiversity, but it will also contribute to climate change mitigation and save life on land from extinction. Synergies must be leveraged and maximized among global efforts on ocean, biodiversity, and climate change. Therefore, it is critical to ensure that the post-2020 biodiversity framework aligns with the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and Paris Agreement on Climate Change. In a few hours, heads of state and government, the UN system, civil society, and the private sector will gather at the UN Summit on Biodiversity to address the cause of biodiversity loss and renew their commitments to action. Let us join in our efforts to protect our green and blue planet and achieve our vision of living in harmony with nature. I thank you.
Yes, well, and I thank Mr. Liu and of course the previous two speakers to whom I will of course be addressing. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes the opening segment of this event. And I'd like to thank our three eminent speakers. We've now come to the panel segment of today's event, in which we'll be addressed by 5 distinguished panelists, all of whom in the first instance will speak for about 4 minutes each. We'll then hear from them further during the question and answer segment. So our first panelist is Elizabeth Mrema, the Executive Secretary sorry, I'm getting messages coming in from all over the place about being muted, but I think you're all hearing me. Our first panelist is Elizabeth Mrema, the Executive Secretary of the Convention on Biodiversity. Elizabeth has worked with the UN Environment Programme for over 2 decades and was Director of UNEP's Law Division. She also served as the Executive Secretary of the UNEP Secretariat of the Convention on the Conservation of Migratory Species of Wild Animals. Ladies and gentlemen, given that Elizabeth is one of the key organizers of today's United Nations Biodiversity Summit, we're privileged to have her with us this morning, but as a result, she's going to have to leave us early to attend to summit duties. Elizabeth, the virtual floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. First, I wish to express my sincere appreciation to our good friend, Ambassador Thompson, for continuously flying the flag for the oceans and elevating our collective ambition and hopes for the ocean sustainability. As the ocean contains around 80% of all life on Earth, a sustainable future for biodiversity depends on healthy ocean. The ocean must be central to our discussions at the UN Summit on Biodiversity. The 5th Global Biodiversity Outlook clearly shows us that none of the 20 Aichi biodiversity targets will be fully met by the end of this year. It does, however, showcase bright spots that need to be scaled up. It equally shows us that when good fisheries management is applied, fish stocks are being maintained and rebuilt. It equally also shows where conservation efforts have taken place, have reduced the number of extinction, and that without such actions, extinctions of birds and animals would have likely been 2 to 4 times higher than what we are told today. It equally, furthermore, shows progress in achieving marine protection. As emerging, we are on track to achieve the quantitative element of Aichi Biodiversity Target 11, and which will push hard to protect the 10% of the global oceans enshrined in the SDGs 14.5. Global Biodiversity Outlook calls for major transitions in specific areas, which includes fisheries and oceans, climate action, sustainable food systems, and a biodiversity inclusive One Health approach. Focused efforts are needed to achieve the transition to a healthy and productive fisheries and oceans But we must not place oceans in a silo. They underpin nearly all the transitions we need to achieve a healthy planet. Global Biodiversity Outlook also clearly illustrates that we do not need to sacrifice ocean health for human needs. In fact, recent research also shows that we should increase the amount of food we eat, which we get from the sea, if we use more sustainable approaches and underutilized resources. Trends in food waste, with around 35% of fisheries and aquaculture harvest being lost or wasted every year, outlines the need for a food system transition that places greater emphasis on a diversity of foods and reduce waste in food supply and consumption. The post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, which is set to be adopted at the next conference of the parties of the convention next year, gives us that great opportunity to begin these transitions, and is perhaps our last chance to achieve a healthy ocean into the future. Finally, we must remember our common enemy of climate change. Climate change calls for a common and concerted effort that brings together biodiversity, oceans, and climate crisis. This UN summit on biodiversity beginning later, the conference of the parties to the Convention on Biological Diversity next year, the UN Ocean Conference in Lisbon next year, the Climate Change Conference of the parties also next year, all provide us that opportunity and indeed the responsibility to lay out ambitious plans and frameworks to realize the changes that will lead to a healthy, resilient, productive, and sustainable planet long into the future we want. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth, and thank you for bringing biodiversity and the ocean and the climate crisis into the one arena where they belong so that we can defeat that common enemy of anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions. Thank you, Elizabeth. The second panelist who will address us today is Andrew Forrest, who's one of Asia Pacific region's most active and dedicated philanthropists. He's particularly influential in tackling global issues related to the ocean's declining health and modern slavery. And he gets his work done through the Minderoo Foundation that he and his wife, Nicola Forrest, established back in 2001. I'd like to add that Andrew has got a PhD in marine ecology from the University of Western Australia, and that he's an adjunct professor at the Central South University in China. So Dr. Forrest, you have the floor, sir.
Ambassador, thank you very much. And like all the other speakers from Prince Charles onwards, can I say that we are all grateful for your strong loyalty to our precious and dwindling life in oceans. But I think it, Ambassador, everyone on this virtual conference, it comes down, I think, to empowering governments with data. Data is exactly that. It's empowering. It lets you understand what you need to protect and how to do it. On land, we understand this well. For example, we know there are 3,890 tigers left in the wild, and that number may be rising. And this is thanks in part to big data allowing poaching hotspots to be identified and vital habitats to be protected. We also know there are just 2 northern white rhinos left, Nickel, Najin, and Badu. I can give you a GPS point in Kenya where they live. Under 24-hour lockdown makes our COVID-19 look simple. But in the ocean, Ambassador, the opposite is true. We don't know how many fish are left, even of our most iconic and most endangered species, and we don't know how many we're catching. And this is largely a byproduct of the fact we don't even understand the true value of what we have. I want you to imagine that you own a gallery of priceless Van Goghs, except you don't realize their worth. In fact, you don't bother to insure them, and you just leave the doors unlocked so that anyone can walk in and take one, or 2 or 3 or 4. It might sound crazy, but that's exactly what we're doing today, and with our own oceans assets. Most countries today are oblivious to the value of the biodiversity that lies within the exclusive economic zones, and as a result, Ambassador, They give other countries free rein to pillage their waters, steal their van goes without any long-term vision or management plan. And it's this mismanagement of our fish stocks globally that is just so much more than embarrassing, it's catastrophic. More than a third of the human population relies on fish for a fifth of our animal protein, and up to a third of the world's marine catch is caught by small-scale coastal fishes. We also know that seafood and its micronutrients could solve the hidden hunger of millions of children in some of the world's poorest countries, and the diseases it causes if we had the data, if we had the management, if we had the governance to fire proper management of these priceless Van Goghs. There are lives at stake here, not just priceless paintings, much more, livelihoods and lives. And the only solution is the way to find sustainably managed fisheries, and to do it in a way that doesn't punish the poorest and most vulnerable. As we all know, sustainability without equality will be a false victory, but to be credible, our solutions need to be founded in solid, reliable data. Data that's as good as what we have on land, if not better. And that's why the Minderoo Foundation is putting its money where its mouth is, investing in a global first, the Global Fishing Index. This index will include three key elements. First, we'll deliver a sustainability index for each country that identifies the biomass of fish in every exclusive economic zone and what's left in their precious bank accounts, what's left in humanity's bank account. Second, the GFI will provide a data-rich snapshot of each country's governance, what they are doing to protect their fisheries and how they're managing our shared assets, and what more could we be doing. While this may sound like a lot of boring numbers, it isn't. We'll bring this data together in ways that makes the human impacts of overfishing visceral. We'll tell often unknown stories, overlooked stories about how overfishing harms communities globally, forces people into modern slavery, and forces people into hunger. We'll use these numbers to bring forward solutions, clear, actionable recommendations for governments, for the fishing industry, for people who invest in the fishing sector all over the world, so that they can see a mirror in front of their actions. Fisheries data isn't sexy, nor is it easy to come by, but that is exactly the right niche for risk-taking philanthropists like Donna, myself, and others. This is the area we must colonize. This is the area of real risk, but it creates the knowledge, which creates the action, which creates the difference to save our oceans. And this is why we just can't talk about this issue any longer. We can't say we have a huge problem. We will be launching our first global fishing index in March 2021. We're delighted to be drawing on the expertise of key partners and collaborators like Global Fishing Watch, the University of British Columbia, the University of West Australia, CSIRO, University of Washington, World Fish, amongst others. And we'll welcome more partners to join us. And no data set is going to be perfect. We can all have a crack at it, but the Global Slavery Index was heavily criticized in 2013, and now it's the global authority on slavery in the world, accepted by governments everywhere. If we can, as a planet, start to move towards managing all our fish stocks based on scientific evidence, the potential rewards are huge, and this will become the authority we need to drive proper, responsible management into the oceans. Smarter management of marine fisheries and scale up of mariculture, we can have healthy oceans that supplies over 6 times more food than it does today. We can banish malnourishment that blights so many coastal developing countries and causes blindness and deformities in so many children. We can develop new business models that financially incentivize protection and sustainably use rather than over-exploit the oceans. Our illustrious co-panelist Enrique Sala, for example, recently estimated that under the right conditions, setting up a strongly protected marine park, attracting tourists and letting locals sustainably fish the spillover outside the park would increase fishers' profits from just under $300 billion to almost, $300,000 to almost $4 billion within just 8 years, and with no loss of income. Please join me in making sustainable and ethical fisheries the new norm. for the benefit of you, everyone, all people on Earth and our planet. Thank you, Ambassador, for this opportunity.
No, thank you, Andrew. And can I a special word of thanks on mentioning those artisanal, small-scale coastal fishermen, fishers. You know, they don't get enough attention. And there is an SDG 14B where we're all supposed to be giving attention to that. So thanks for highlighting that. I know that you have to go off to a high-level meeting in the country that you're at, but I do hope you're going to be able to stick around for your one question, because I'm going to ask you a bit more about fisheries. We'll come back to that. That's essentially what so much of the ocean's biodiversity is about. So thank you, Andrew. Look, our next speaker, our third panelist, is UNCTAD's Special Advisor for the Blue Economy, Donna Bertarelli, who's one of the world's great ocean advocates. She's a prominent philanthropist and investor, and Donna Bertarelli is also an accomplished sportswoman. 2016, she became the fastest woman to sail around the world. UNCTAD, to spell it out for you, for those that don't know, it is the UN Conference on Trade and Development. So Donna, if I may, please tell us why ocean biodiversity matters so much for coastal communities, in particular for small island developing countries and other developing or vulnerable countries who rely on the ocean. Over to you, Donna.
Thank you, Peter. Well, after the brilliant speech of Andrew, I don't know if there is anything else to add. I mean, I think you just hit the point on everything. So we realized, and all our speakers know that, and you, all the participants know that ocean biodiversity matters for us all. And it matters most urgently for people whose daily lives depend from it. To islands and coastal communities for whom a 34% decline in reef-associated fish over the last 40 years means having to fish longer or further to catch less than their parents did, or for whom a warming ocean means species migrating away from their waters altogether. So to give this crisis a human face, we have to ask, what does the loss of biodiversity mean for the 3 billion people who rely on the ocean for food and livelihoods? So how can we protect and use ocean resources to help fight poverty, build food security and jobs, empower women and other vulnerable groups, combat climate change, and support sustainable development for future generations? One thing is clear. We will not achieve these goals if we value ocean biodiversity in terms of what we can extract. Rather than calculating how much a fish is worth caught in a net, or how much a mangrove is worth dredged and developed, we should look long-term and ask, what are these creatures and ecosystems worth alive and healthy? What can they contribute in carbon absorption or towards jobs and rebuilding healthy fish stocks? We really need a new common language for biodiversity that values ocean life and long-lasting benefits, and to invest in solutions and businesses that protect and share that value. We must strike a better balance between protection and production. Just think, fishing is the last industry that harvests wildlife on a massive scale. And not only have we failed to reach Aichi Target 6 to fish sustainably by 2020, but things are worse now than the goal that was agreed on 10 years ago. Yet, despite all we know and all we have promised, some governments are paying to make things worse through subsidies that unfairly drive fishing that destroys ocean life and does not benefit coastal communities. About 87% of these subsidies support the fleets of developed states, while 90% of fishers live in developing countries. Just imagine what these billions of dollars could do in reinvested to advance a sustainable blue economy. That is the kind of change we need. And change is possible. But first, states must conclude the WTO negotiations on fisheries subsidies by the end of this year. There's still time to meet SDG 14.6 by finally agreeing to stop all subsidies that drive overfishing and illegal fishing. Second, trade deals are being negotiated all the time. Governments should ensure all trade deals are agreed and enforced with conservation and biodiversity, including in the ocean, front and center, and not as a footnote. Third, the world can unite behind a big push to meet SDG 14.5 to protect 10% of the ocean by 2020. So far, and we may disagree on the percentages, I believe it's 5.3% of the ocean protected, including just 1.18% of the high seas. But this 10% target is within reach. And the next step, a global agreement to protect 30% by 2030. And finally, in few weeks, countries that share responsibility for the Southern Ocean have the chance to make history by creating 3 MPAs encompassing nearly 4 million square kilometers. It would be the largest act of ocean protection ever, propelling us towards the 10% SDG finishing line. These opportunities are ready to be seized. What we need is bold, visionary, and responsible leadership. There will never be the perfect circumstances. There will always be other priorities and threats. The pandemic should sharpen our resolve, heighten our determination. Small island developing states, which are actually great ocean states, were among the first to raise the alarm and call for and implement changes to protect the ocean and its rich, yet fragile and declining biodiversity. Their concern is not what will happen in the future, but rather what is happening right now. So please, let's answer their call. Thank you.
Wonderful, Donna. And as a special envoy, let me thank you so much for mentioning SDG 14.5 on MPAs and your mention of CAMLA. That is so doable, as you say. Next month, CAMLA meets in Hobart, Australia, and they have it in their power to approve those Antarctica MPAs. And as you say, that'll get us up to SDG 14.5's target, and also SDG 14.6 on the subsidies. That's doable this year. The WTO General Council meets in December, and we're talking about removal of harmful subsidies. You know, this is, the negotiators are negotiating there at the moment in Geneva, and all of us should raise the expectation for both SDG 14.5 and 14.6. So thank you so much for doing that. Ladies and gentlemen, our fourth speaker is Atsushi Tsunami, who's president of the Sasakawa Peace Foundation and president of the foundation's Ocean Policy Research Institute. In the latter role, he specializes in ocean policy, science, technology, innovation, and international partnerships. And amongst his many other special advisory roles, I'd like to just mention that he's a guest professor at Waseda University with a special interest in nano and life innovation. And I mention that, Atsushi, because the UN Ocean Conference to be held next year in Lisbon has as its theme science and innovation. That's where we're placing all our hope. So glad to hear that this is your specialty. And please give us your thoughts now, Atsushi.
Thank you, Ambassador Thompson. And I'd like to join my previous speakers to thank for having me in this panel. And let me highlight some key points on marine diversity from my perspectives. And last year, the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity in Ecosystem Services, or IPBES, warned us in this report that the rate of the biodiversity loss for the past 50 years is unprecedentedly greater than ever. We are losing seagrass by 10% per decade. We overfish 33% of the fish stocks. 43 to 86% of the marine mammals, seabirds, and sea turtles are affected by the marine plastics, as we know it. Coral reef covers will go down to 10 to 30% of the current coverage under the 1.5 degree warming scenario, and less than 1% under the 2 degree warming scenario. So 2 weeks ago, the CBD Secretariat released the Global Biodiversity Outlook 5. It was good to know that we are likely to achieve the 10% target of marine protected areas by the end of this year. However, though, the report tells us that we have partially achieved 4 out of the 20 Aichi biodiversity targets and failed to achieve 15 targets out of the including target 6 on sustainable fish stock management, target 7 on the sustainable aquaculture, and target 8 on marine pollution control. This means that we are not acting fast enough to stop and reverse marine biodiversity loss. While we need to bolster our efforts to achieve the IG target, we also need to advance our discussions to agree on the post-2020 biodiversity framework that must be effective and science-based in achieving our common goal of conserving global biodiversity with effective means of implementation, including monitoring, assessment, information and data sharing, and capacity building. We need to strengthen ocean-related targets such those on the loss and recovery of marine biodiversity. Effective management of MPAs, eliminating marine plastics, and recovery of marine and plastics and its impact on marine life, and nature-based solutions for climate change in the post-IG target. Means of implementation, monitoring, and assessment information data sharing. So Japan currently protecting 8.3% as marine protected areas has adopted the revised Nature Conservation Act in April last year with the intent to designate seabed areas as MPAs and to achieve the 10% MPA target by the end of this year. It is a multiple year process and it takes a time, but on the other hand, resource users and developers move much faster than regulators to exploit marine resources. So we need to be more strategic in increasing the speed and accelerating our actions. Ambassador Thompson mentioned earlier this year as well at our webinar the importance of, again, I wanted to highlight the materializing the proposal of designated additional marine areas as MPAs under the CAMLA, or the Commission for the Conservation of Antarctic Marine Living Resources, and we emphasize the role of science in such discussions. I express my sympathy and wish for the expeditious ceasing actually of disastrous forest fires in the west coast of the United States and Brazil. It is obvious to everyone that the color of the sky turned orange and smokes proliferating, but the area of forest fires detected by the satellite data. However, it is hard to know what is happening under the sea. Therefore, monitoring marine biodiversity, visualizing monitoring data, sharing such data, and promoting the public access to such data and information are indeed an important process for promoting science-based policy dialogue to conserve marine biodiversity. Well, thank you, Ambassador.
Thank you, Atsushi. We'll come back to that theme of science during the Q&A session, so thanks for bringing that up. This leads to our fifth panelist, who's the world-renowned Enric Sala, who's National Geographic's Explorer in Residence. Gosh, I'd like to have that title one day, Enric. I know that you describe yourself as a full-time conservationist, and I applaud you for that. Enric founded and leads Pristine Seas, which is a project that combines exploration, research, and media to inspire country leaders to protect the last wild places in the ocean. To date, Pristine Seas has helped to create 22 of the largest marine reserves on the planet. Enric, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Thompson. As my friends before me have alluded to, we are taking fish and other marine animals out of the ocean faster than they can reproduce. And actually, most fish stocks today are overfished. 90% of the large animals are gone. And global warming is turning the ocean more acidic and warmer, which is killing corals and many other species around the world. So what can we do? His Royal Highness, the Prince of Wales, and my friends before already outlined what the world needs to do. We need to phase out fossil fuels and replace them with renewable energies. We need to manage fisheries more responsibly to reverse the depletion of fish stocks. But we also need to protect as much of the ocean as possible. And this is something that we should really focus on. marine protected areas are the most cost-effective tool to restore marine life and all the benefits it provides for us. I have seen it with my own eyes and measured it. When we protect an area from fishing fully and other damaging activities, the biomass of fish increases on average by 600% relative to the unprotected areas nearby. And the fish in these reserves, of course, when you don't kill the fish, they take a longer time to die. They live longer lives, they grow larger, and they have sex for longer, producing many more babies, which together with spillover of adult fish helps to replenish the areas around the reserves. But these marine reserves also help to restore the entire marine ecosystem and all the benefits they provide for people and the planet, like protection of coastal areas by mangroves and coral reefs, carbon sequestration by seagrass beds and kelp forests, increased economic opportunities through ecotourism because people want to go where the fish are, and also an improvement of the health and well-being of communities living near them. Yet only 7% of the ocean, or 5.3, as Donna said, depending on how generous you are on what you call a protected area, is protected today. How much we need to protect? The studies overwhelmingly tell us that we need at least 30% of the ocean protected. So if the benefits are so clear, why haven't we got there yet to that 30%? And mostly because there appears to be a conflict between extraction and protection. But research shows that we can protect more than 30% of the ocean and obtain multiple benefits. Protecting the right percent of the ocean would not only preserve and restore biodiversity and all the benefits it provides to people, but also it would yield a greater catch of fish. In other words, the spillover of fish from these reserves would exceed the foregone catch if we protected the right 30% of the ocean. But there is another big benefit to climate. We have found that the sediments on the seafloor are the largest carbon sink on the planet. But bottom trawling and dredging today, and eventually deep sea mining, disturb significant amounts of the seafloor and the carbon within, which is resuspended in the water column. And our new research estimates that that disturbance is causing CO2 emissions that are larger than the annual emission of most countries. That's why protecting 30% of the ocean strategically in highly protected areas would deliver multiple benefits: conservation of biodiversity on all the benefits it provides for us, food provisioning, and climate change mitigation. And the economic benefits would outweigh the costs. This would benefit all people on Earth, especially the livelihoods and well-being of coastal communities, particularly in developing countries, given their reliance on ocean biodiversity. That's why we need to protect and rewild our ocean. Thank you.
That's great, Enric, and I'm sure there, from all the nodding heads I've seen, we can work on that strategy. We can develop that strategy. You know, the 30 by 30 movement is starting to grow, and as we approach Kunming. So let's develop that strategy and make it count. Look, ladies and gentlemen, we're now in the question and answer segment of this event, and let me tell you that in the lead up to this event, which, as you know, precedes today's UN Biodiversity Summit, what I did was I approached some eminent members of the Friends of Ocean Action, and I asked each of them to pose a question for the panelists to discuss today. So I'm going to put their questions to individual members of the panel to respond to. And I'll put the first question to you, Andrew, because I know you have to leave. The question is from Arnie Matheson, who's a special advisor to the FAO Director General. He posed a question which, first of all, stressed that we should be mindful that 100% of ocean fisheries, well managed, would promote biodiversity conservation. So Arnie's question is specifically, according to FAO, 65.8% of fisheries are sustainably fished. How do we raise this figure to meet the objectives of SDG 14.4 so that all fisheries are sustainably fished, while ensuring that the food and livelihoods that the sector provides for are protected? Over to you, Andrew.
Thank you, Ambassador. Look, it's a really simple question. Our home is the ocean. I mean, 99.9% of the livable space on this earth is the ocean. It is home to incredible biodiversity. You just ask any diver, ask Donna Bertarelli, she goes diving all the time. It is dazzling out there, but our ocean is also the source of food and micronutrients for billions of people and jobs for literally millions of people. As Arnie rightly mentions, we have to find ways to manage fisheries in ways that are sustainable, but also equitable. And the good news is that just biodiversity itself can coexist with the need to feed people and ensure people have decent work if we manage it right. Strategies like aquaculture will ultimately be part of the solution, but we also need to get really serious about fisheries governance. Just as you cannot walk into someone else's farm and wipe out most of the herd for personal profit, the precious resource that is our fisheries requires strong governance. Our fisheries need this robust policy framework, Ambassador, strong fisheries management, laws informed by science, steps which must be taken to control who can fish your waters, what they do, and it needs to be backed up by enforcement. And this is why we're seeking to track through the Global Fishing Index. It's being released in early 2021, and the GFI will include new data, country by country, on the steps governments are taking or not taking, Ambassador, in their own national waters to put these policies in place to enforce the right rules and regulations to control fishing within sustainable levels. This is a crucial gap in our data that we seek to fill with the GFI, and we know that better data comes better decisions. So let's keep on working with a range of stakeholders like we did with the Global Slavery Index. Stakeholders all over the world which wanted to see modern slavery come to an end, like we want to see the destruction of our oceans come to an end, and bring together the people and data we need, Peter, sorry, Your Excellency, to make the sustainability the default rather than the pipe dream of the world's fisheries. Thank you.
No, I think you're spot on there, Andrew. The issue of governance, supporting RFMOs that need support and holding them responsible. This is the governance factor which we have been not strong enough on. So thanks for highlighting that. I know that you have to move on. So when you do go, you go with all of our best wishes, and thanks for what you're doing so much. Look, the next question is from Sanjayan, who is the Chief Executive Officer of Conservation International. And I'm going to put it to you, Tsunami. In my mind, it is a question that goes to the heart of the inseparability of biodiversity in the ocean and climate crisis that was so eloquently articulated to us this morning by the Prince of Wales in his message. Sanjayan's question reads, climate change is fundamentally altering the temperature, salinity, and distribution of life within the global ocean. From the recent ocean heat waves to the record low levels of Arctic sea ice and increasingly devastating cyclones and typhoons, the whole ocean is feeling the effects today. How can we be explicitly including climate change in our actions for biodiversity in the ocean? Your thoughts on this, Satsushi?
Thank you. That's a very good question, but tough question. But we have taken seriously, of course, the IPCC reports on the 1.5 degree the ocean and crest fire. UNEP also released the emission gap report last year that presented the policy recommendations to individual countries and urged, for instance, Japan to reconsider the construction of coal-fired power plants and promote carbon-free electricity supply. Maybe you may remember that the Japanese Minister of the Environment, Minister Koizumi, reaffirmed that in the Japanese government position at our economist webinar last month, and expressed his intent to take the lead in restraining fossil fuel power generation. So to save the ocean from the climate change, we need to be more progressive in reducing the greenhouse gases emissions around the world by implementing the Paris Agreement. Our ocean has been changing. Speaking about ocean acidification or the impact of the atmospheric carbon concentration on the ocean. The Japanese Meteorology Agency released a report recently that the pH level of seawater around Japan shows the trend of decrease by 0.02 each decade. The increased concentration of atmospheric carbon and its absorption in this area, seawater, is a cause for such a trend. On the other hand, it is being a prevalent trend that around Japan that the seagrass has been disappearing due to multiple reasons. And data shows that the seawater temperature was higher around the Tokyo Bay Area by 1.4 degrees in 2018, compared with the average temperature of the previous 5-year period. So local divers say that seawater temperature doesn't go down in winter and constantly remains high. Wind velocity has increased by 8.3% over the last 7 years. One of the hypotheses was that warm seawater supposed to the fertility of rabbits and sea urchin that are predators of the seagrass. Strong wind induces strong wave that removes the seagrass bed and reduces the habitat for other fish species, thereby undermining fishery productivity. So fish stocks are projected to move from tropics to the poleward. The change in the route of Kuroshio, the current that runs in the south of Japan, can affect fisheries in Japan. So we have the poorest harvest of Surrey delicacy in the autumn in Japan, and we are investigating the multiple causes of such a poor harvest and Surrey in Japan this year. So we need to understand this chain of causes that encompasses from the atmospheric carbon, climate change, marine environmental change, and fishery productivity. Then we need to take into account local environmental and socioeconomic characteristics and explore innovative approach to resolve such challenges. The marine environment and biological resources has been changing faster than we adapt to such changes. So we need science, innovation, and stakeholder partnership for overcoming such a challenge, including the reduction of atmospheric pressure on the ocean and adaptation to climate change. And I wanted to join the Mr. Forrest and such as our foundation or the role of private foundation in supporting the science and the global effort of UN's Decade of Science, for instance, that is starting next year, is going to be very important. So I'm looking forward to working with them as well. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Atsushi. And I'll keep your thought rolling there about the scientific side of things and the decade that's starting. But I just wanted to make a special word of thanks to you for highlighting the movement of species away from the tropics because of changing conditions. This is a serious problem for people living in the tropics. In our part of the world, in the Southwest Pacific, we've seen the projections of what's going to happen to our tuna populations this century, and it's deeply worrying. Look, the next question, to continue the scientific theme, is posed by Vladimir Ryabinin, who's the Executive Secretary of the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission, based at UNESCO. I'll put Vladimir's question to you, Donna, if I may. He says that major developments are occurring in the domain of governing the conservation of marine biodiversity. There's a UN conference converging on the text of a legally binding instrument on this subject for areas beyond national jurisdiction. I think all of you know about BB&J. Then, of course, the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development. It's starting in exactly 3 months. And the health of ecosystems is its desired outcome. Since today's event is about the future of biodiversity, I am asking, this is Vladimir, how the science of ocean biodiversity can better sustain itself. I ask this because ocean science is underpinning major decisions determining the fate of life in the ocean and the future of our species. And yet IOC of UNESCO is struggling to support what is by far the largest distributed database on marine life, which is the Ocean Biodiversity Information System, OBIS. If protecting life in the ocean is to be a commitment, and it depends on science and data, shouldn't there be a commitment to protect ocean science and data? That's Vladimir's question. So Donna, just to expand on that, on his question, as with all research, and reliable data is incredibly important. Many working in the ocean space are talking about the need for publicly available and easy to use data, which will help make marine protected areas more effective. Can you tell us a little bit about the action that you are taking to make this possible? Over to you.
Yes, Peter, I think it's clear, and we have heard it. We're not investing enough resources for a sustainable ocean. And definitely, I see even worse that innovative technologies are channeled more often into efficient ocean exploitation and rapid return on investments, rather than to be used for ocean conservation measures, driving decisions. I mean, they should be driving decisions on ocean policies and trade regulations. You all know that I worked for over 10 years in ocean conservation, creating vast MPAs with several partners, and more recently through the Pubert Ray Ocean Legacy Program. We have helped protect 8 million square kilometers of ocean, but none of it would have been possible without a close collaboration with governments and local communities. Yet, what I've learned all these years is that creating a new MPA is just the beginning. And that is already complicated enough, and Enric knows that. The real challenge is to monitor and enforce the protection. And then, even when it's enforced, to measure its effectiveness, as well as the ecological and economic benefits it provides, it's not even done. I mean, we're far from being able to do that. So to add to this, monitoring a coastal MPA with high level of human activity or a vast remote ocean area, it's both technically challenging and very expensive. And even though we have satellites, drones, sensors, or other monitoring devices that provide new data and ocean insight, this data is not consolidated and often hard to access and analyze. So my vision is therefore to take marine protection to the next level and provide the much needed tool to effectively manage marine reserves in a cost-efficient way. I strongly believe in partnerships, like Andrew said, not only to develop, but implement what I hope will become a truly collaborative platform supporting effective and dynamic marine spatial planning. I chose to work with many others, with Global Fishing Watch, and design a tool to help governments, park managers, and other stakeholders to manage, monitor, and enforce existing reserves, and also to support efforts to both create new reserves and expand existing ones. This free-to-access open platform integrates multiple layers of data. And I think that's the innovation, from the bottom of the ocean to the birds in the sky. It will gather and analyze data on human activities from fishing, shipping, mining, and of course, tourism, as well as ocean data such as water temperature, oxygenation levels, biodiversity, productivity, and animal telemetry. The tool has shareable workspaces for users to collect and share data, and a public dashboard to feature and promote participating sites. With that, we will be able to measure and monitor fishing pressure, identify illegal fishing, advance our understanding of specific threats, like the impact of underwater noise on whales, and help with planning for climate change and adaptation. The platform is currently being developed in 4 countries and will be launched publicly at our Ocean Conference in December. We plan to expand to many more countries within 3 years, helping us advance towards the goal of protecting 30% of the ocean by 2030. And I think this is the key, isn't it? Science tells us to protect 30% of our ocean, but how effectively will this 30% be? And will there be enough? Without ocean data and a platform that can help us drive our decisions, it will be very difficult to measure whether our ocean conservation efforts are sufficient or even successful enough. So it's exciting, and I welcome anyone to come and be part of it. And we're building it at the moment, and any contribution is welcome. Thank you.
No, thank you, Donna. That's a great answer. And in fact, on all of our behalf of all of our participants, I want to thank you for what you're doing, not just for marine protected areas, but for this marine reserves platform that you're launching with Global Fishing Watch. Great news. I'd like now to turn to a question that the Friends of Ocean Action benefactor, Mark Benioff, has asked, which would be if the panel could clarify the connection between ocean health and human health. So, ladies and gentlemen, if we consider everything we receive from the ocean, from the oxygen we breathe to the nutrition we imbibe, from the microplastics with which we're filling the ocean to the microorganisms upon which our future may depend. This question, I think, is at the nub of the ocean biodiversity climate crisis nexus. So, Enric Sala, no one better than you to respond to that question. Over to you, sir.
Well, thank you for the question, Mark. Well, what you said, Ambassador Thompson says it all, right? We need a healthy ocean for a healthy life, including the oxygen, starting with the oxygen we breathe. And as we heard before, more than 1 billion people obtain essential nutrients from food from the ocean as their main source of animal protein. So ensuring that these ocean ecosystems will be able to continue providing food will ensure the good health of these people. Studies also show that the health and well-being of people is greater for those living near marine protected areas. And this is not just something that's happening in the ocean, but protected areas on the land and the sea also. They bring to people who can visit them health and well-being benefits that, if translated into economic output, that would be equivalent to $7 trillion per year, thanks to that improved well-being. And healthy ocean ecosystems also help to prevent disease. We all have heard about the problems of wildlife trade and cutting forest on the land, but there are species of animals like giant clams and sponges that filter seawater for a living. And they remove pathogens from the water, including bacteria that cause cholera in humans. So these animals are like the N95 masks of the coral reefs. So protecting reefs with these species in them is an insurance against disease. And these are just a few examples of why we need a healthy ocean.
Well, thanks for that, Eric. You, as usual, answer it so much better than I can. But I want to put another question here, which is from one of our friends of Ocean Action, which is from Mark Abbott, who's president of the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute. And Mark says, we often consider the many ways climate change is affecting biodiversity and is often aggravating biodiversity loss. But what about the flip side? What do we know about the ways that biodiversity helps regulate the planet's climate? For example, how does ecosystem structure and variability affect the ability of the ocean to sequester carbon? Or how does the daily migration of the ocean's twilight zone ecosystem impact the ocean's carbon pump? I'll throw this question to the remaining members of the panel. Anybody who wants to take it up, but if we've got no takers, I'll put my thoughts on Mark Abbott's question. In fact, let me just launch in quickly, and then please, any other members of the panel just jump in after me. You know, I visited Woods Hole and I saw a fantastic presentation on the twilight zone. And when you get down in the twilight zone where the light from the surface is just about gone, this is before you get down in the really deep ocean, there is the world's largest daily migration, because all the life that's down in that twilight zone comes up to the surface at night, right? This is the largest daily migration of life on the planet. And what struck me most about that presentation was, you imagine, you know, as we move around the sun, that wave is going around, that migration is going around the world like a Mexican wave, you know, and it's been going on forever. And this may indeed be the lungs of our planet for all we know. We have to study it. That's why the decade of ocean science is so important. But I'm emphasizing this here now because there are already people that are talking about exploiting the life in that twilight zone, which is dense life down there, exploiting it for our commercial benefit. And we really need to understand that before we interfere with that system. But I throw it over to the others. Can anybody say something else on that subject in answer to Mark Abbott's question?
I think, Peter, the only thing I would add is that if we would have only invested a little percentage of what we have invested to conquer space in order to try to find solutions or an answer on why there's life on Earth, maybe those answers are in the ocean, and we know so little, and definitely there isn't enough science that goes into, and there isn't enough investments that go into ocean research. So that's what I would just want to say, is that we need much more, and then once we will know, maybe the answers will be in the ocean and not in the skies.
I think that is indeed a very perceptive answer. Don, I'll keep coming back to you here now, because I've got a question from Jane Lubchenko, another of our friends of Ocean Action. And her question is, in your opinion, what are the biggest easy win opportunities for ensuring our investments in biodiversity conservation are actually effective? If I may, I'm going to ask you to respond, from the perspective of the UNCTAD Special Advisor for the Blue Economy, regarding the economic value of the ocean and how this can be best protected for the people who most rely on the ocean's biodiversity. Over to you.
Well, I think I'm going to be very boring to our audience because I'm just going to repeat myself. The two easy wins I see for this year are protecting Antarctica and achieve SDG 14.5, and then to achieve SDG 14.6 and stop all harmful fishery subsidies that drive overfishing, contribute to illegal fishing, and leading to massive biodiversity loss. These subsidies sabotage the SDGs that governments agreed to support. They also distort the industry and fishing methods that wouldn't be profitable otherwise. It creates unfair competition between large fleets and artisanal fishers. And let's remember that one industrial fishing boat can capture in a single day the equivalent of what an artisanal fisher catches in 1 year. So I believe it is vital for both policymakers and investors to focus less on the short-term value we can get from the ocean today, and more what we can gain in the long term by protecting resources and responsible management and sharing benefits more equitably. There are many examples on how marine biodiversity is worth more alive than extracted or dead, like Enric was saying just earlier. And to add to this, International Monetary Fund economist Ralph Shami calculates that a single whale is worth about $80,000 if caught, but about $2 million left alive. Each year, one blue whale can absorb as much carbon dioxide as 30,000 trees, making the total whale population worth over $1 trillion. But just think how much carbon whales would absorb and what that would be worth to the global economy if their populations could be restored to pre-hunting levels. So why isn't investment in whale conservation a priority in climate action plans? And then there is the other giant of the ocean, sharks. A recent study in Costa Rica estimates that the tourism value of a single hammerhead shark at $1.6 million compared to less than $200 if caught and sold. Similar results were found for reef sharks in Palau with a lifetime value to tourism of $2 million per shark versus just a little over $100 for sale in a fish market. And a similar argument can be made for mangroves and other coastal wetlands that store more carbon per area than terrestrial forests. They also provide life-saving protection from floods and are breeding grounds for fish. And yet they are disappearing at an estimated global rate of 1 to 2% per year, with 35% loss in the past 20 years. The reason being that the immense value of mangroves as blue carbon bank is not typically considered when making local land use decisions. So financial incentives need to be introduced to encourage the active protection, restoration of these ecosystems and species. This can be through blue bonds, debt for nature swaps, and blended financing. The transition is starting to happen, and the Seychelles are on their way, as we have heard from President Faure. A new understanding of the real long-term value of ocean biodiversity will help shift investments and priorities towards a sustainable, equitable blue recovery, and shift more of the benefits to communities in developing countries and creating jobs. So Jean also has, always has like difficult questions, and these might not be easy wins, but there are win-win opportunities to invest in actions that maximize the value we can gain from the ocean biodiversity and make a deep, lasting difference to people who rely on it most, while protecting our health and the health of our planet.
Great answer, Donna. And all of those are just practical measures that we can put in place in the short term. This is not something that is medium to long term. Those are short-term action measures for us all to take. And thanks again for making the comment in defense of the rights of the artisanal fishers. I think this is something that's coming out strongly from today's event, and I hope the note takers are making sure that's part of the outcomes. SDG 14.B, that is, ladies and gentlemen. So look, I've got to move things along, for time is running out. The next question comes all the way from Samoa, from whence Kosilatu, the Director General of the Secretariat of the Pacific Regional Environmental Program, asks us, with the ocean in effect our last significant global commons, do you think we've learned enough about managing our global commons? And if so, what are the most significant lessons we have learned in managing our other global commons that we should apply to sustainable management of the ocean? Atsushi, I'd ask if you could give a rather brief answer to Kosi's question.
Yeah, well, that's a very good but tough question. I guess that one of the milestones we need to mark is the newly proposed agreement on marine biodiversity in the BBNJ discussion. The fourth session scheduled in March this year is postponed, and intersessional work is currently carried out to advance the negotiations. I'll provide a global scheme for the benefit sharing of marine genetic resources, environmental impact assessment, area-based management tools, and capacity building and marine technology transfer. So we need to capitalize upon the momentum to pursue this new agreement in order to enhance the effectiveness of marine biodiversity conservation and the sustainable use of marine biological resources in the area. So this is one of the efforts that we should really put forth, and being a very good learning lesson of how we can manage as a common. And a global institutional architecture has been developed for the recent years. So I'm very pleased that we are closely working with the government of Palau, for instance, in preparing for our ocean conference, as we know, to be held this year, this December. So the COVID-19 should not be the use as an excuse to retire our work on neglect our duty to protect our ocean for our future generations. So that the forthcoming second UN Ocean Conference and all these things that we have been talking about, how to manage and address, and with the that's going to be very important, and to make sure that we would not stop and putting this enforcement or the management mechanism in place. And lastly, I just wanted to highlight that for the science, that I just wanted to echo Donna's point that we need to push science and invest in science, and the role of private sector, and like our private foundation or Mr. Forrest, for instance, should really work together to provide a new sort of support for ocean science from not only the government funding programs, but also from private sector foundations. And we need to collaborate to find the best way to push for this. And this would really enhance the global common management institutions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Asushi. That's a very erudite response to that, and I agree with you 100%. If I was going to wrap it up in 4 words, I'd say blue-green recovery road. You know, COVID is not the end of the world. The climate crisis could be, but it won't be, because we're going to go on the blue-green recovery road. Look, sadly, our time is pretty much up, and we have a wonderful message coming up from the Deputy Prime Minister of Sweden. But before that, I'm going to ask Henrik Sala to wrap things up for the Q&A. Henrik, in your recently published book, The Nature of Nature, which I'm really enjoying reading, the Prince of Wales, His Royal Highness, has written the following in the book's foreword. I quote, "A deep appreciation of natural history is a kind of poetry which should instill a sense of wonder. And that leads to love of the world, of which we are an intrinsic part, with a profound respect for the existence of other creatures." So Henrik, those words I think resonate with everyone, for it would be a cold heart that has never experienced that wonder and respect and love for the natural world. But how can we best marry that deep feeling with the daily grind of economic realities? In other words, I suppose what I'm asking you is, what in the end is the economic justification for protecting nature? Over to you, Henrik.
Well, look, there will be no economy without people, like the COVID pandemic has shown very clearly, right? And there will be no people without the natural world. I mean, there is no discussion about this. So what do we need to protect our life support system and prevent the risk of the next pandemic and help nature help us mitigate climate change? Well, we can start by protecting 30% of the ocean and the land by 2030. We released an economic report this year that suggests that the cost of protecting 30% of the planet would be $140 billion per year. This may seem like a lot, but this is only a third of what governments of the world spend to subsidize the activities that destroy nature, that destroy our life support system. And just another comparison, this is less than what the world spends today on video games. We know that the cost of the pandemic, or estimate that the IMF estimates probably $9 trillion in the next couple of years. So investing in nature, investing in nature-based solutions for climate, and also a prevention for the next pandemic is cheaper and smarter than having to respond to the cost of the next crisis. So we know what we need to do, right? The money is there. We just use it to destroy our life support system.
Thank you so much, Henrik. As usual, so eloquent on the subject. Look, and thank you to all our panelists. You know, I can hear them. There's hundreds upon hundreds of people who've been listening to your words, honorable panelists today, who are applauding right at this moment. But before we switch off, there is a last message, which is a fantastic one. I looked at it last night. It's from the lady alongside whom I have the privilege of sitting as co-chair of the Friends of Ocean Action. As well as serving as Deputy Prime Minister of Sweden, Isabella Lövin is the Minister for Environment and Climate in Sweden. In this role, and during her previous roles as a member of the European Parliament and as a journalist and author, she's worked tirelessly on behalf of sustainable fisheries and a healthy ocean. So please listen now to close off this high-level side event with a message to us all from Isabella Lövin.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, ocean leaders and friends. It's impossible to overstate the importance of keeping the ocean clean and healthy. It's home to millions of beautiful and amazing species that feed and heal us in so many ways. It also plays a crucial role in making this planet habitable. Without the ocean, there is no life. I'm astonished by how often the ocean, its creatures and its role on our planet is neglected or simply forgotten. The tragedy below the surface is for the most part hidden for the eyes. But it is there. The bleaching and death of coral reefs, fish stocks collapsing, microplastics and toxic substances in fish and shellfish, But sometimes we can see the catastrophe above the surface, and then we react. You actually want to cry when you see the massive oil spill in Mauritius close to the beautiful Blue Lagoon, or dead albatrosses with their bellies full of plastics, and most recently, the heartbreaking mass stranding of whales in Tasmania. As a global community, we need to act. The UN Ocean Conference hosted by Sweden and Fiji in 2017 was a game changer. The world came together, ocean awareness increased, partnerships were built, and commitments were made. I'm proud, but far from content. The problems we discussed 3 years ago remain. Many have grown worse. Last year, IPBES reminded us about the biological crisis our planet is going through. Dear friends, in 2008 and 2009, the joint actions of world leaders across the globe were critical for resolving the financial crisis. Today, to stop the corona crisis, the pandemic, and save lives, we introduce extraordinary measures that were unthinkable less than a year ago. We should meet the ecological crisis with the same amount of compassion, determination, and boldness. The positive news is that today we have an opportunity to fill two needs with one deed. While mitigating the economic effects of the COVID-19 crisis, we can halt and reverse the ecological collapse on land and at sea. We can invest in nature, sharpen regulations and frameworks, incentivize sustainable activities and innovations, stop subsidizing unsustainable activities, increase transparency in global supply chains, invest in science and act upon it, and respect nature and the future generations. The task is by no means an easy one, but I'm convinced that we can replicate the unprecedented responses to the financial crisis. The future of our planet depends on it. I'm very pleased that Kenya and Portugal are determined to host the second UN Ocean Conference when it's safe to meet again. I'm confident that it will be another global game changer that will strengthen science, stimulate innovations, and develop new partnerships. Much of the world's innovation originates from the private sector. Governments must incentivize that force of innovation to be a force of transition for sustainability. And the financial flows must be redirected to sustainable investments and businesses. So to summarize, make sure that the ocean is never forgotten or ignored. Remember that leaders have proven capable to deal with global crises before. Expect nothing less. Let's join forces and make sure that we can celebrate some progress when we meet again in Lisbon. Thank you for your attention. Vinaka Vakalevu.
And Vinaka Vakalevu to you, Isabella, and for all your service on Ocean's behalf. Folks, we're gonna wind things up now, but before you leave, I see there's still hundreds of people online. So just let me say two last points that we should all have in our minds. The two take-homes for me will always be that, firstly, the ocean has to be front and center if we're talking about biodiversity. It's where the majority of life on the planet exists. We live on a blue planet. So that's number one. Never talk about biodiversity without having the ocean front and center. Second point is we have a one common enemy, which is our burgeoning anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions. And we have a chance in Glasgow next year to decide what side of the watershed we're going to go on. Continuing towards a 4-degree world, which means the end of biodiversity and life in the ocean and life on land, or taking the logical path, which is to keep us within a 1.5 degrees world. And Glasgow is where that's going to happen, but we're all in this together, whether we're biodiversity or ocean or climate bureaucracies and people, We're all in this together. One common enemy needs one common commitment from all of us. So we'll see you at the summit today. We'll see you in Kunming next year. We'll see you in Lisbon next year, and we'll see you in Glasgow. And we will take the steps that are required to get a rational future for Homo sapiens on this planet. And thank you so much, everybody, for joining with us. Big virtual round of applause for the panelists and to all of you who've stuck with us for this full hour and a half. Thank you, everybody, to Dessa as well for running the technical side. Au revoir.